I'm Mindy, and welcome to Fiery Dragon Media's DRAGONCAST. Welcome to the introductory episode of DRAGONCAST. My name is Mindy, and I'll be your host. So first, I wanted to go over a couple of things with you. So everyone mentioned in this story will have fake identities assigned to them. So all events are true, everything is accurate, nothing has been exaggerated, but everyone will have a fake identity to protect them. And you'll understand why as we get into the second episode of this podcast. But we have to start at the very beginning, and the beginning was very beautiful. So you will hear a very beautiful love story to start with, and then things change. I also wanted to let you know that as this is being recorded, this is not being voice acted. Anything that you hear, any emotions that you hear are real. They are true, and you will hear them as they happen. This is very difficult for me to talk to you about. I may cry. I have a level of anxiety right now about speaking about this because I haven't actually voiced this for a long time. And my family just found out about all of this. And this is something that happened 12 years ago. So you're going to be hearing a secret that I hid from my family for 12 years. And again, this is a true story. And it does get a little crazy. The beginning is not so crazy, but just hear me out. And I think it'll be worth it for you. So again, all incidents are true and not exaggerated, and names have been changed for the protection of the people involved. I will go by Mindy for the purposes of this podcast. And this is a true story of love, loss, war, peace, reconnection, and ultimately and unfortunately, loss again. This is a story of both hope and sadness. These emotions, again, are going to be raw. They are going to be difficult for me to get through, but stick with me and maybe my story can help you. And this is a story about mental illness. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and ultimately so did he. And so this is a story about both mental illness, his and mine. And this is about PTSD that occurred both on and off of the battlefield. This is a story about a boy who ended up with a traumatic brain injury that changed his personality forever. And that's been very difficult to deal with. I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is a story about winning the war abroad and losing the war at home. Again, just bear with me because this is very difficult for me to speak about. But you might be wondering, how did you get PTSD? I'm a girl, obviously. I've never served in the military. I thank those that do. It's a very brave and, a job that you have to sacrifice a lot for. And I do thank all of our service members out there. But I did not get PTSD from serving in the military in any capacity. I actually was diagnosed with PTSD at the age of 4 because I witnessed a family member get paralyzed in a horrible wreck that happened right in front of me. So I wasn't in a vehicle, but it happened right in front of my face. And I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I still have flashbacks. I still have nightmares. I still have hypervigilance. I still have insomnia and anxiety to this day that are all traced back to that event. For 2 years, from the ages of 4 until the age of 6, I did not speak. I had a condition called selective mutism that was brought on by the shock of the accident. And although I had the knowledge of how to speak and I continuously learned, I could not bring myself to use my words. I couldn't make myself speak. If I wanted something, I would point to it. And this happened for 2 years. So obviously I was greatly affected by what I saw. And I was always very, very shy. I was super shy, painfully shy, and I was withdrawn. And growing up, I didn't have very many friends. So I just had a few close friends, and that was just how I lived my life. I didn't know how to live it any differently. But we're going to go to how I met Jack. Again, his real name is not Jack, but I didn't want to use his real name. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I didn't get his permission. I don't know how he would feel about me speaking about this. There are some issues involved that you'll find out about in the second episode that make it difficult to tell this story because we were both told, basically by the government, not to speak about some things that we know about. And yeah, we'll get into it. It's pretty crazy, but again, it's true. So we'll call him Jack. And I will tell you how I met Jack. So my best friend and her husband would like to hang out at the bars. We were young. We were 22. And we would like to hang out at the bars on the weekends. That's what kids did. And it wasn't to drink and party and all that. It was just to really just sit and relax and talk to each other. We might have a few drinks, but we weren't big on dancing. We weren't into that whole scene. We just wanted to go and sit and talk and not worry about things that were going on in our personal lives. So we showed up to the bar early. And the reason that we showed up early was so that we could get a table to sit at, because the table seating was slim at this particular bar. So we're sitting, and it's probably only about 9 o'clock, which is very early for the bar. Bars really don't get popping until about 11 o'clock at night here. So we're at the bar, and we're all sitting for some reason in a line. My friend Valerie is sitting next to me. Her husband is next to her, and 2 of his friends are next to him. Why we sat that way, I have no idea. You would think that it would make more sense for people to sit across from each other so we could see each other, but we just didn't. And again, I couldn't tell you why. I don't know. It's just the way things worked out. And it actually did work out because the seats across from me were empty. And this guy walked up, this guy in a white baseball hat, walked up with his friend and asked to sit next to us across from me. And I didn't know what to do because I was still so painfully shy at that time. I've gotten so much better now, but at that time, you could just read the shyness on my face. I looked at my friend Valerie and I was like, Valerie, what do I do? You know, like, what? I mean, yes or no? And she was like, yeah. Tell him to go ahead and sit down. So I told him to sit down, that they could have a seat. And he was obviously very into me, the guy in the hat. And he asked me what I was drinking. I told him I was drinking a Sex on the Beach. And he kept them coming all night long. So I've never had that happen before at that time. I'd never had a guy that showed that much interest in me because I'd always been shy and withdrawn. And, you know, I never really put myself out there because I didn't know what to do. And suddenly here's this guy that's showing me all this attention, and he's really into me and he's really kind. And that is something that stood out to me, is how actually sweet and kind he was. He wasn't forcing himself onto me. He wasn't expecting something to come from the interaction. He just wanted to sit with me. And he just kept ordering drinks as an excuse to sit and be with me, which was really nice. At one point in time, he actually got me to get up and dance, which is something that I had never, ever done. I had never had a guy, get me to dance or ask me to dance. And at first I declined. I was like, oh, no, I can't dance. I don't know how to dance. I've never danced a day in my life. I'm going to make a fool of myself. But he said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about them. Just take my hand. Come on, let's go. And he coaxed me to dance, and we danced. And he led me by my hand off of and onto the dance floor. And when the lights came up at 2 a.m., for final call, he took his hat and he put it on my head, and he said, I'll get that back from you when we go on our first date. And let me back up for a minute, because at one point I just took his phone and I was like, oh, that's a cool phone. I used to work in a cell phone store. So I was like, oh, that's a cool phone. Can I see it? And I was like, oh, this is really cool. It has all these cool features. And really, I'm just programming my name and number into his phone. And I didn't even tell him. I was just like, oh, okay, this is a cool phone. Oh, yeah. I did it real quick. And I put his phone back to the home screen, and I handed it to him, and I thought I was being so slick. But I wasn't that slick, because he apparently knew what I was doing the whole time. And he immediately found my name, and he was like, Mindy, huh? And I was like, yeah, Mindy. He was like, okay, Mindy, I'll be calling you. Anyhow, on the way out of the bar, my friend Valerie was like, you need to give him a kiss or something. And I was like, Val, no, I can't. I'm still so shy. I'm like, no, I can't kiss him. No. And she was like, you don't have to marry the guy, Mindy, but you need to go and you need to give him a kiss. Just kiss him on the cheek. And I was like, okay. So I went back and I found him and I gave him a kiss on his left cheek, and I just smiled and walked away. 2 days later, he called me and we went on our first date. We went to a Thai restaurant and we shared a yellow chicken curry together. And when we went on that date, that is when it clicked to me how special he was at that moment. I think I knew a couple of days prior that, when I met him, he was going to be somebody special, but it didn't really hit me until that date. And we had such a good time, and we had so much in common. We liked all of the same things, and we just had a great time. And after that, we were inseparable. We hung out every single day. Every day. I would go to work, and then I would go to the barracks, and I would hang out with him until late, and then I would go home. And on the weekends, I would pick him up from the barracks, and we would drive around either with his friends or my friends. And we would just hang out, and we would just spend time together. And half of the time, we would just sit back to back on the barracks floor and talk about life. So he was always a really good guy. He was always a gentle guy. He was always worried about protecting me. He never, ever, ever did a single thing to emotionally hurt me or physically hurt me. And I don't think that in his right frame of mind, which is what he was in at the time, I don't think that he ever would have done that. But things changed after the war, and we'll get to that. I took some notes, so I'm just going to glance down and make sure that I didn't miss anything. That was really important. So like I said, sometimes we would just hang out, and we would just drive around, and we would just enjoy each other's company. And I really loved him, and he really loved me. And it was the first time that I really loved somebody that I felt love back in return. And, like I said, we would go everywhere together. And one day we were driving around with my friend Sarah. And Sarah was dating an Army guy named Frost. So we'll just use a last name, and that's not even his real last name. So Sarah and Frost were in the car with us, and I was driving, and Jack was in the front seat. And Sarah dared us to go to this adult novelty store. And I was like, oh no, I'm not going there. No, I'll drop you off, but I don't want to be seen there. I'm not going there. We're not doing it. No. And Sarah was like, oh, you're a chicken. And I was like, fine. Okay, we'll go. So I go to the adult novelty store, and I roll up into the seedy little parking lot, and I tell Sarah and Frost, all right, go ahead, go in. Well, we'll wait out here. Go ahead, do what you're going to do. And Sarah is giving me a whole bunch of shit. She's like, Mindy, you're a chicken. I knew you wouldn't do this. Just come inside. So I look at Jack, and he looks at me, and he just shrugs his shoulders, and he's like, you'll be fine. I'll go in with you. We'll just go in for a second. Nobody will know we're even here. Nobody has to know about it. Let's just do it and get it over with. So we walk in, and Jack and Frost, I didn't really think about these names and how they would go together in this part of the story. But Jack and Frost were standing in the corner where there were some whips and chains hanging. And Sarah and I were a few feet away. We were laughing about some fuzzy handcuffs or some lingerie or something that was right in front of us. And I hear Frost say, I bet you don't know anything about these whips. And then I hear Jack say, I'm from Texas. I know how to work a whip. And the next thing I know, I turn just slightly, turn my head to look at Jack, and that's when the whip comes across and hits me on the cheek. Just grazed me. It was an accident. He immediately dropped the whip and came running toward me and said, oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay? And the drag queen behind the counter was dying laughing at us. She was howling like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen in her life. And meanwhile, I was fine. I was just shocked that I got hit like that. I wasn't expecting it. And again, total accident. He was so apologetic. We laughed. The drag queen laughed and said, that's some funny shit, y'all. And I remember that. I remember that story. I know how to crack a whip. Yeah, right in my face. But anyway, so there were a couple of other memories that I have that were vivid. I remember that we went to the movies one time and I fell asleep. I fell asleep with my head on his chest, and he had his head on my head, and suddenly the lights came up because while I was asleep, there was this big electrical storm, and it took out a generator at the movie theater, and we had to leave. And I remember that. And then I remember the day that he told me that our lives were going to change. I remember the day that he came barreling down the barrack steps with papers in his hands, and he was so happy. He was so happy. He was running down the stairs, and he was so happy. And he was like, Mindy, I got deployment papers. We're leaving. We're going to Iraq. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I wanted to match his level of enthusiasm and excitement, because he really was very excited and very happy to be going on this mission. He really was looking forward to it. And I wanted to be happy for him, but I was so scared. This was in 2008. This was at, the height of some activity in Iraq. And I was afraid that he would go overseas and he would never come home. But what never crossed my mind is that he would come home, but he wouldn't come home at the same time. And we'll get into that. Gosh, that is very difficult for me to think about, but we'll get into it. The second episode will be a little more difficult. And we'll get through it. But I remember him telling me that he was going to deploy at the end of July 2008. And we continued to spend every waking moment together. Around the 4th of July, his mom came down from Texas with his son. He had a child from a previous marriage. They had been divorced. And the child was only 7 years old at the time. So we spent 4th of July with his mom and his child. We watched the fireworks together at the Riverwalk. And I vividly remember that because it was a very special night. It was just a beautiful night. And it was close to his deployment. And that's always stayed with me. Anyway, his mom and son went back to Texas, where they were from. And I remember helping him pack for war, making sure he had all of his equipment, triple checking everything, helping him clean out the barracks where we had spent so much time together. And I remember the day that we had to say goodbye. And it was a hard day for both of us. And I remember walking down the barrack stairs to my car, and he got in the car with me. And I was in tears, and he was in tears a little as well. And he handed me a picture. It was a picture of him with his son. And he said, "Mindy, if anything happens to me over there, if anything happens to me and I don't come home, will you please make sure that my son gets this picture? And will you please tell him that I love him?" And I said I would. And I took the picture and put it in the console. And he reached into his pocket and he handed me a little Bible. And I was taken aback, and I said, "Well, what are you handing me this for? You're about to go to Iraq. You're about to get shot at." And he said, "I know, just hold this for me." And I was like, "No, you're going to Iraq. You're going to need this Bible more than me. I think that you need to keep that." And he said, "Mindy, no, I'll be back. I'll be back for this. And I'll see you then." And then he had to go. And he got out of the car. And I saw in the rearview mirror that he stood there and watched me drive away until he couldn't see me anymore. And then he went to Iraq. And that is where things change. And that is where things get dramatically worse. And, the story is so complicated from there. What started off so well, what started off so good, what started off so beautiful and so strong, it just changed when he got to Iraq. And, I had always known that, people say once you go to war, you never come back the same, but I didn't want to believe it. I thought for sure he would come back. He would come back the same if he came back. And it was very difficult to struggle with all these emotions, not knowing how your loved one's doing from day to day, if they're alive, not being able to speak on a regular basis, and waiting on snail mail and sending snail mail back and forth. And, there was a lot that happened. There was a lot that happened when he was in Iraq. And I truly, honestly feel that if he had never gone to Iraq, then things with us would not have changed. And things changed in such a negative way when he came back from Iraq. And, I think about that all the time, because there was one day where, we were driving around and, he said something along the lines of, we should get married when I get back. And I was like, yeah, we'll get married, but let's wait until you get back, but we'll do it. We'll get married. And, I thought that we would. I thought that we would get married, and we loved each other, and we never ever had a single fight. And we had so much fun, and we were just constantly together. But things changed, and I wish that you guys knew how difficult it was for me to actually sit down and record this. This beginning is the hardest part, because it's hard to remember how someone was when their mind has been permanently changed. And it's like a part of him died in Iraq. And I wish that hadn't happened. I wish that he hadn't have gone. I wish that he didn't have those orders, and I can't change it, and he can't be fixed. And that has been very difficult to deal with. I know that he can get help and he can get better, but he will never be who he was before. And that makes me incredibly sad. Anyway, this is getting long and drawn out, and I don't even know how long I've been talking to you guys right now, but I thank you for listening, and I hope that you will continue to listen. And the story does get a lot crazier, which you will find out about in the next episode. So again, this is Mindy with Fiery Dragon Media, and this has been episode 1 of DRAGONCAST. I greatly appreciate all comments. I have an email address listed below that you can utilize if you want to reach out. And again, I just hope that this story helps somebody else. And thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time.